conservation of the critically endangered species of the great Indian bustard to the scope of our fundamental rights, the right to equality and right to life being expanded and clearly spelled out. This possibly is a wide-ranging and critical verdict from the Supreme Court at a time when India is seeing unprecedented impact of climate crisis. From unprecedented heat wave, drought alerts and water crisis for this summer across India, which, by the way, has just started. A winter that saw some of the worst pollution landmarks. The worst of deteriorating air quality index, the record high temperatures even during the winters for districts and states that should have been seeing the minimum temperatures. The judgment came on a petition by wildlife activist M.K. Harjeet Singh and others to protect the great Indian bustard, a critically endangered bird found only in Rajasthan and Gujarat. It's during the order of this that the court expanded the scope of Article 14 and 21. That's the right to equality and the right to life, to include the right against the adverse effects of climate change. This image is going to be hard to forget for anybody who lives in India, not just New Delhi. That's the New Delhi, India's capital in the worst of winters. Now, this landmark judgment, quite landmark in its own, considering we are in the peak of elections, but no mention of climate change or pollution or challenges from it by any political party, neither a poll issue. Despite government's policies and rules and regulations recognizing the adverse effects of climate change and seeking to combat it, the court said there is no single or umbrella legislation in India which relates to climate change and the attendant concern. However, this does not mean that people of India do not have a right against the adverse effects to climate change. And this being extremely critical, this is where the Supreme Court has drawn in Article 14 and Article 21 to mean a right against the adverse effects of climate change. Before we get into that, the petitioners in this case, including the well-respected wildlife activist M.K. Harjeet Singh, who petitioned for the conservation of the great Indian bustard, join us at this point on how he sees this verdict. Thank you very much, Mr. M.K. Harjeet Singh, for joining us at this point. My first question to you, from the right of conservation of the endangered species and the scope of fundamental rights, sir, how do you look at this judgment?
It's unfortunate that what has been projected is an either-or situation. That either we meet with the requirements of our alternate energy, or we save the species. It's very regrettable that the Supreme Court is being, the attempt is made to misguide it. I have to say that rather clearly. Firstly, we can and we must meet with our demands for alternate energy. We are all, including myself, we are environmentalists. But let me put it this way. A question to the others. Is this the only way where we can meet with our energy demands and our commitment to COPs and the Paris Agreement for alternate energy? Are there no alternatives? And I'll mention this. Firstly, we are not talking about the habitats of the bustard only. It's not just for the bustard. It's for local people to graze their livestock. And please remember that for the rural communities, the animal husbandry is still a very major preoccupation, and it has been a traditional way of life. That is being covered. Secondly, there are sacred groves there, which are sacred to the Bishnoi communities. They have been traditionally looking after them. And that is where they get their natural resources. That's where they have a religious sentiment which must be honored. And also, this is where the bustard and others are able to graze. And it's also the last repository of climax xerophytic vegetation.
Right. But sir, I'm also
desert.
trying to understand, can you explain to us any project that, according to you, has been able to see the conservation that we are talking about and the development both go hand in hand, particularly with the Great Indian Bustard?
Gujarat did a wonderful job of covering the Narmada canal with solar panels. Now, it has multiple advantages. Firstly, you don't have to acquire land. You cover up you have it along the canal, which has roads practically on both sides, if not at least on one side. So it is always easy to maintain, no maintenance required. There is electricity lines along it so that you can excise power from it. No lines need to be laid. It just there itself. But two more very important points. That is that you save the water from being evaporated from the hot sun, which is more applicable to the Thar Desert than it is to Gujarat. One. And even more important, those solar panels need to be washed every week. And you need to wash it more in the Thar Desert than in Gujarat. And the consumption of water is humongous. The consumption of water is roughly, I'm given to understand, for 30 gigawatts power generation of the thing. The water consumption annually is 11,000 crores to 3,100 crore liters of water. Here you have water underneath the canal. You just wash it and the water is still used. There in the desert, you will have to mine that water, which should be for human consumption.
All right. No, Mr. Harjeet Singh, but why are you seeing this as a case of either one or the other? Because the court also has set up an expert panel into this to look into how there could be conservation of the Great Indian Bustard as well as the right to life that has been expanded for humans as well. How the two can go together?
The Honorable Court has said this, and I'm grateful for that comment, but it has to also be matched by actual implementation of the desire of the Honorable Court. And I quote that the saving of the bustard is not negotiable. He said that, the Chief Justice.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Harjeet Singh, for joining us to put in those perspectives. Let's look at what all the court has really brought into the ambit of Article 21 while also speaking of Article 14. And this is going to be important to understand as well. Right to equality and right to life, both being critical sources of right against adverse impact of climate change. The Chief Justice of India said, without a clean environment which is stable and unimpacted by the vagaries of climate change, the right to life is not fully realized. The right to health is impacted due to factors such as air pollution, shifts in vector-borne diseases, rising temperatures, droughts, shortages in food supplies due to crop failures, storms and flooding. From these, it emerges that there is a right to be free from the adverse effects of climate change. Also mentioned were the roles of indigenous, tribal communities closely knit with their environment and destruction of their lands and forests, or their displacement from their homes may result in a permanent loss of their unique culture, impacting their right to equality. And also spoke of the right to life against adverse effect of climate change from the lens of gender roles. Unequal energy access disproportionately affects women because of their traditional gender roles. The court said, beyond mere adherence to international agreements, India's pursuit of sustainable development reflects the complex interplay between environmental conservation, social equity, economic prosperity, and climate change, literally summing up the challenge before India that has positioned itself as a leader in tackling climate targets and unleashing its renewable energy potential. The court spelling a critical interface where all ought to meet. Let's right now introduce my panelists at this point. Ashwini Kumar Dubey, who's an environmentalist and an advocate with the Supreme Court. Ajay Suri, wildlife expert and wildlife filmmaker. Harjeet Singh, who's a climate activist. And we hope we'll be joined by Bhavreen Khandari at some point. Thank you very much, all of you, for joining us. Well, let me go across to you first, Ajay Suri. How do you really look at what's unfolded in the court today? We, of course, spoke to Ranjit Singh, and he said it's unfortunate that this seems to be either or the other kind of a situation. Is that how you see this as well?
I do not see it this way, Sneha, because I think the court has said that it wants to strike a holistic balance between development and protection of Great Indian Bustard. Don't forget that, for the last couple of years, even before Supreme Court's recent intervention, a lot has been going on the ground to save Great Indian Bustard. WII, the World Wildlife Institute of India, has been on the forefront. They have set up hatcheries in Rajasthan, and we have more than half a dozen, baby chicks, who have been incubated in those hatcheries. But the problem, as I see, the Great Indian Bustard is that normally, people have a double belly or a triple belly, but in the case of Great Indian Bustard, it is suffering on account of, if I may say, quadruple whammy. Number one, poaching. That's the main reason why less than 150 Great Indian bustards are left in the wild. A few years ago, the saying was very rampant that once we bustards go to Pakistan, they will never come back again. Because there are so many.
Mr. Ajay Suri, we seem to have an audio issue with you, and we'll try and fix that. At this point, let me just go across to Harjeet Singh. Mr. Harjeet Singh, how do you look at what's unfolding in the court? And it's also important to bring into context India's sustainability goal development, its targets, how India is trying to look, or how India has projected itself, gained prominent not only as a voice of the global south, but also about how it has led into tackling the climate crisis challenges internationally, with various summits, with various landmark decisions that seem to have been made internationally, including COP28. How do you look at what's the court's interpretation today? Do you think the two go hand in hand?
Yes, Neha, it is indeed a huge challenge, and the kind of ambitious targets that India has set around the world, people have a lot of expectations from our country, and India's goal of having energy to the tune of 500 gigawatt by 2030 is quite an ambitious goal. And there is no doubt that India has to scale up its renewable energy. But at the same time, the way this Supreme Court judgment talks about the balance between conservation and development, particularly saying that it's not a binary choice. And I would like to agree with what Mr. Ranjit Singh also said to your channel, that we should not be seeing this judgment as either or. Yes, there are elements which can be misinterpreted. We have not lost hope because of the 7-member committee that's going to look into it over the next few months. But the important aspect is that we should look at the big picture. There is something wrong with the kind of development model that we are practicing, which is very extractive. And that's why we have to move away from fossil fuels and promote renewable energy. But we cannot make the same mistake that we did.
In fact, Mr. Harjeet Singh, before you go into that ambit, let me just explain some facts to our viewers at this point. And if you can have those graphics up as well. Now, let's look at what India's coal consumption really is. 55% of energy needs are met through coal. 70% of power generation is through coal. Second largest coal consumer and producer globally. 14% spike in coal production between financial year 22 and financial year 23. There's a target of almost 1.3 billion tons of coal production for 24-25. Now, when we're looking at this, there's also another contrasting image, and that's also where it's important to put into the picture. The fourth largest installed capacity in the world, that's India's renewable energy milestone. Fourth largest wind power generation capacity, fifth largest solar power generation capacity. And Harjeet Singh, it's also important to understand that this court's order kind of brings on how the two may not always go together, because you have the conservation of the Great Indian Bustard on the other hand, you have the renewable energy goals on the other hand, and then you have the solar power plants that need to come up according to the current plan in a particular place, and it doesn't seem to be the best of the harmonic environments to go forward. Is this also indicative of the larger picture?
It is, absolutely, and that's why it is important to look at some of the alternatives that do exist. We cannot make the mistake of having now renewable energy owned by large companies. The option is to promote decentralized and community-owned renewable energy system, which has multiple benefits. It generates local employment. It can be done in a manner where it is integrated with the local ecosystems. And it also provides energy security, and a lot of maintenance can be done by the community itself. So the challenge is that we are only looking at large projects owned by large companies, which will have a huge impact on the environment, and then you have to have those transmission lines. So the decentralized energy system is something that can deal with it. The other aspect is also about looking at consumption. Yes, India has a large population, but we should not blindly follow the same model of development that the West followed for hundreds of years, and that's why we are facing the climate crisis.
Okay, if I can get in at this point, Mr. Ashwini Kumar Dubey. Sir, you know, there's this statement that the court has said that beyond mere adherence of international agreements, India's pursuit of sustainable development reflects the complex interplay of environmental conservation, social equity, economic prosperity. But the fact that for the first time possibly, you have a court that has spelled out the very obvious, that climate change, its adverse impact, is now included under Article 21 and Article 14, that you should have the opportunity to be saved of it. How critical is this? Is this truly landmark?
Yes, it is. Because right to equality and right to life is the soul of the Constitution, and that cannot be truly practiced without giving a clear, safe environment to the citizens of this country. Sneha, I myself belong to a place where democracy dies in darkness. Singrauli, which is a critically polluted zone of this country, where lakhs of metric ton of coal, fossil fuels, is burnt every day. Hundreds of kilograms of mercury, despite the Minamata Convention, is being generated. 20,000, 21,000 electricity, power plant electricity being generated, and people are suffering. So I can understand the plight, because I belong to that area where every day people are breathing the smoke. People are breathing the air full with the carbon. That is why the sustainable development, check and balance, environmental balance, and the renewable energy is the need of hour, where the pollution is less. While balancing, the Honorable Court's judgment must be seen. It's a landmark, Sneha. Why? Because while balancing two equally crucial goals, the conservation or the protection of the environment as a whole on the other hand, and also to meet out the requirement, and also India's commitment under international conventions. So Honorable Supreme Court, while modifying the judgment of 2019, have categorically they have emphasized saying, showing the concern over the adverse effect of climate change, and also said that the environmental stability with the right to life and health is the core of the fundamental principles of the Constitution. And that is what, when the seven
Right.
members committee, which has been constituted by Honorable Supreme Court, where the subject experts, the Director Wildlife Institute of India, and also the National Board for Wildlife, the Chief Conservation of Forest, former Chief Conservator of Forest, and also the Chief Wildlife Warden and Principal, and the other persons who have expertise in their fields will submit its report. And that is why required, because the thermal power plants that we see, that the carbon emissions which are generated because of the coal production, coal burning, is having much more impact, the carbon emission, which India has said in Minamata Convention, and also Indonesia and Jakarta, that we will not produce this. That is what the Honorable Supreme Court have passed a landmark judgment considering the MC Mehta judgment. Ashwini Dubey Union of India judgment passed by the Honorable National Green Tribunal. And I think it's a landmark judgment which should be practiced in order to have the balance between the climate change, between the economic the growth, and also with the human life and liberty, which is the fundamental principles of the Constitution, the people of this country.
All right.
Yes, Sneha.
No, very important perspective there, but let me get in Ajay Suri as well. Ajay Suri, you know, when we were speaking to Mr. Harjeet Singh, and even as we have been reading up on this issue, one of the things that comes to fore, and what the Supreme Court has also clearly mentioned, is about the indigenous groups, you know, the tribal groups that are very closely linked to the land, to the forest, or to a very sub-local hegemony, if I may, a very microbial part of the larger environment, but their livelihoods are critically involved with those environments. Now, my question is, conservation of whether it be flora, fauna, birds or animals, forests, whatsoever, is not very much alienated from the right to life, not only of humans, but particularly of these tribals and indigenous areas. And the court drawing this sharp observation, bringing it to the larger limelight when talking about the expansion of the scope of Article 14 and 21, isn't it actually bringing the two together and looking at possibly a workable solution?
Yes, definitely. Because I'll tell you, in many places of India, as a wildlife filmmaker and as a, you know, as a normal wildlife or wherever I
In fact,
go, I
Ajay
find
Suri,
that the local
if I can just ask you
Yeah.
one thing, sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
If you could,
Yeah.
for our viewers' benefit, bring out one or two instances where this cohabitation is so closely knit to the survival of not only the human species, but also the flora, fauna, the rich biodiversity that may exist around. If you could bring us just in next 1 minute, one or two examples that could reflect that.
See, I cannot really, you know, give you a very concrete example, but I can give a generalized statement that a lot of tribes, you know, in Madhya Pradesh and in Rajasthan, they have been living in close harmony with the wildlife, so much so that both the wildlife and the people have become wiser because of it. And whenever this link has broken, you know, it has affected both the parties. And vice versa also, there also have been cases, like I'll tell you, some indigenous tribes which were there in the Rajadi National Park. They were actually playing havoc with the wildlife. It was the inverse case. You know, it was not what you are referring to. When these people were like removed from the park really regenerated. But by and large, local population which has been living in these forests, on the edges of these forests, in the case of great Indian bustard, let me tell you, it has been a very, very shy bird. And one of the reasons for its decimation over the years is that so much of development, so much of human presence has happened around it that, you know, it has come in a panic mode. You know, like I said, there were four reasons. It has rampant poaching, the loss of habitat, and the fact that the great Indian bustard has a very low reproduction rate. You know, all these factors have gone against this grand bird. And don't forget, you know, if we take development as an example, you know, like it's a harbinger of all things good. This is not the case, because I think primarily because of the development of the last 100 years, we have already lost two magnificent species. One is the cheetah in the 50s, and one was the Himalayan quail, which was last seen in Missouri. And it would be the great Indian bustard is already gasping, for its last breath. And it would be a great tragedy if, from 150 it comes to zero, because the way things are happening, I personally feel that the Supreme Court's intervention has come a bit late in the day. And my fear is
Okay.
that, okay, these bustards are being, hashed artificially, but then they are victims of human imprinting, means they cannot be set out in the wild.
Sure.
So if the way things are happening, we may continue with these television discussions about how locals have a stake in the in the wildlife development. But unless something is done, for both the parties, for the locals as well as the wildlife, the ultimate sufferer will be the wildlife because it doesn't have a vote.
It doesn't have a vote. Let me just take this on from this point, Harjeet Singh. Ajay Suri says the wildlife does not have a vote, but billions of Indians do. Unfortunately, this election is not about anything of what we are discussing today. And it's not like Indians don't know about it. Winter after winter for the last few years, summer after summer for the last few years, we are seeing unprecedented levels, and we have explained it to our viewers how, whether it be the heat, how it be the cold, how it be the drought, the heat wave alerts that are currently in different parts of India are absolutely unprecedented. India has seen a unprecedented dip in temperatures, unprecedented rise in temperatures, all of these aspects together. But no political party and none of the voters seem to have been able to make this a political win or lose battle, even though the Supreme Court has now come up with a very important interpretation of Article 14 and 21. But clearly, do you have a sense, Harjeet Singh, that no one stands to gain at this point politically in the elections in India with respect to this important judgment, whether it be the wildlife or the humans and our existence?
Well, it is really sad, Sneha, that the rights of the Mother Earth are not being represented adequately by us as human beings. We are very much part of the same ecosystem, and our leaders have given very little attention to environment, our ecosystem, and the way planet functions. And whereas we, as you very rightly said, we are seeing the impacts all around, how droughts are worsening. We are seeing devastating floods and cyclones, and heat waves are becoming far more intense. Yet we don't see the issues of environmental protection or tackling climate change as a headline. But I must say, when farmers talk about their distress, when they protest, the underlying factor is climate change, because the way their crops are being destroyed and they're not getting adequate price, it is an underlying factor, but we are still not seeing it as a headline. So we as human beings actually have to be far more responsible. We should not think that we are the ones who own this planet. In fact, the planet is going to survive without us, but we cannot survive without the planet and the flora and fauna that exist. That humility should exist in us as human beings, and we should see us as part of the ecosystem and play our role in protecting the planet, which is not happening. And leaders have an important role because they are elected and they're supposed to be preparing those policies and implementing those so that all of us can live in harmony with nature.
Right. Ashwini Kumar Dubey, let me just go across to you as somebody who's been in the Supreme Court, somebody who's an environmentalist. You know, the current BJP government at the center has spoken so much about climate, whether it be the G20 summit that we hosted with great pride in India, or whether it be the COP28 that India led in many initiatives, or even before this. BJP has claimed, or the BJP government at the center has claimed that India has set goals and worked towards collaborative approaches to be able to get those goals over a stipulated period of time effectively, with member nations being the voice of the global south as well. But in India, domestically, do you see this garner enough attention from a government that really has positioned itself as one of the global pioneers?
If we see the increase of our forest, the increase of the plantation of trees in India, that has definitely grown. The way we see the destruction or the compliance under the Forest Conservation Act, at the same time, there are the plantation of trees which are an attempt by the government to make the environment sustainable, and there is a check and balance. But it will take time. Why? When you cut a tree which is 400, 500 years old, and then you plant a tree, maybe double of that, those which you cut under the Forest Conservation Act, that take time to grow. Second, despite that, we have other resources like the renewable energy. We have not worked much on that, and that is why, if we see there is a destruction, there is an increase in the pollutants in the air, and being in Delhi, we can understand better. Third, right to a healthy environment and right to be free from the adverse effect of the climate change. It's not only the concern of India, but being one of the pioneer country which is working for the environment protection and the Honorable Prime Minister's goal, we have to be much more active. And that is stopped when the Constitution of India says the right to a healthy environment encapsulate the principle that every individual has the entitlement to live in an environment that is clean, safe, and conducive to their well-being. Then if we see the constitutional provision...
Right, I think we seem to have lost Mr. Ashwini.
Yes.
All right, we seem to have had an issue in between with that frame, but we seem to have you back. But thank you very much, all three of you, for joining us. Ajay Suri, Ashwini Kumar Dubey, as well as Harjeet Singh. This is just a very small conversation, but perhaps a very important move that India is getting into a trajectory that would possibly define the course of how the fundamental rights of humans and the conservation of some very critically endangered species are both going to be defined henceforth. Thank you very much for joining us. Well, it's time for a short break. On the other side, do join us for all the latest.
Sir,